They fired Vera Chun the same week her $3.2 billion autonomous defense system was set to revolutionize modern warfare. No explanation, no courtesy meeting, just a cold escort past the mahogany-paneled boardroom where her life's work was being rebranded under someone else's name. But what the new CEO didn't know was this: the version they stole wasn't built to dominate battlefields. It was built to quietly self-destruct, irreversibly, and entirely on her terms. They didn't just fire me, they performed a surgical deletion, like removing corrupted code from a live server. 1 week before the Pentagon demonstration, one breath after I'd saved them $3 billion in development costs, they walked me out with my security badge confiscated and a junior analyst watching me like I carried a contagious disease. The last thing I remember was the soft hiss of the executive floor's automatic doors closing behind me. No dramatic slam, just that subtle pressure change in the air, like something vital had been vacuum sealed away forever. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. Not when Marcus Hartwell stood at the head of Titan Tech Defense's glass-walled war room and delivered his rehearsed speech about operational restructuring and strategic realignment. Not when the room full of Pentagon liaisons, patent lawyers, and junior engineers I'd personally mentored refused to meet my eyes. Not even when I saw what was sliding across that polished conference table toward me. A termination letter. A non-disclosure agreement. An intellectual property transfer document, unsigned but already notarized. It was too choreographed, too clinical. Marcus had never possessed the technical background to understand the Phoenix 7 platform's neural architecture. His expertise was in shareholder presentations and quarterly earnings calls, but he'd been installed as interim CEO of Titan Tech exactly 3 weeks before my name vanished from every public-facing document. His mission seemed singular: eliminate the inconvenient remnants of the company's creative past. I was the biggest inconvenience of all. The silence was what haunted me most. Not the betrayal, not the legal terminology, the complete absence of sound, as if acknowledging what was happening might somehow make them complicit. The younger engineers studied their iPads. The strategy directors pretended to check their Outlook calendars. My chair squeaked slightly as I stood. That was the only noise in the entire room. Then I walked out, chin high, carrying nothing but a manila envelope and the knowledge that they had no idea what they just activated. Before Marcus Hartwell ever stepped foot in Titan Tech's executive suite, I was the steady heartbeat in a chaotic ecosystem of corporate egos. While others pitched concepts to defense contractors with glossy PowerPoint presentations and military buzzwords, I was 3 floors down in the underground labs, rewriting threat assessment algorithms in real time and designing firmware that could adapt mid-flight to avoid enemy interception. Every line of Phoenix 7's code was forged in that controlled chaos, battle-tested through countless simulations, refined during all-night debugging sessions when the rest of the team was home with their families. They called it a collective achievement when it finally scaled, but my name appeared only in side comments, version notes, and back-end attribution strings that nobody outside the engineering department would ever read. I was fine with the anonymity until I wasn't. Until the marketing team presented our prototype to the Department of Defense with a voiceover script that called Phoenix 7, a revolutionary breakthrough by Titan Tech's visionary leadership team, while I sat in the back row with a stress headache and a notebook full of uncredited innovations. I never complained. I was too busy managing version control and machine learning behavior trees that even our senior system architects didn't fully comprehend. They needed me, whether they admitted it or not. Even during the final review sprint preparing for Pentagon deployment, I was the last person in the server vault each night, fine-tuning algorithms that would determine life and death in future conflicts. Yet when the board introduced Marcus as a stability asset, the subtext was unmistakable. They wanted a rebrand, not just of the platform, but of the people behind it. That's when I started encrypting my private development logs. Not from paranoia, but from pattern recognition. I watched the gradual purge unfold. One engineer reassigned, one director promoted out of the division, one lead consultant removed after a single closed-door conversation. I wasn't special. I was simply last in line. But here's what they never anticipated: Phoenix 7 didn't exist in a single code repository. The core neural mapping was distributed across isolated nodes, most developed in a secure testing facility in Austin, completely outside Titan Tech's internal network. Only I possessed the uncompressed kernel. Only I had the original decision trees that enabled true autonomous thinking. And the truth is, I'd never surrendered it. Not completely. The version they'd stolen was like a sophisticated Echo, roughly 85% of the real system. Functional enough to fly impressive demonstrations, but not intelligent enough to evolve. And when it stopped learning, it would begin dying. Quietly. Elegantly. Inevitably. The night they handed Marcus my corner office, I didn't break down. I coded. 14 hours straight, 4 monitors, 3 backup drives, no sleep, just silence and the crystalline focus that comes when you've been erased by people too arrogant to examine what they've stolen. I already knew their playbook. They deploy Phoenix, 7 ahead of schedule, bypassing comprehensive audits for flashier timeline announcements. They'd scrub my digital fingerprints from the archives, reroute administrative logs, rename core modules, and present it as if it had always been their creation. But what they couldn't know, what they'd never bothered to investigate, was that the version I'd left behind wasn't identical to the system I'd actually built. The decoy functioned flawlessly on the surface. It could launch, scan perimeters, respond to operator commands, even simulate complex evasive maneuvers based on real-time telemetry. But its learning algorithms weren't recursive, they were capped. Its threat assessment protocols didn't update, they simply repeated previous patterns. I'd buried the kill switch 4 layers deep, a biometric dependency linked to my specific fingerprint and cardiac rhythm, embedded within an innocuous package labeled Echo Bridge Authentication Sync. If 90 days elapsed without validation, the decay would commence gradually, almost imperceptibly. First, drones would stop recognizing environmental changes. Then their formation coordination would lag. Eventually, they'd fall completely out of sync, not crashing dramatically, not exploding spectacularly, just drifting like abandoned satellites, unreachable and silent. I called it phantom drift. Not designed to destroy them, but to let them deteriorate in full view of their new owners. And I knew they'd never diagnose it in time, because they'd never invested the effort to understand what made Phoenix 7 genuinely revolutionary. They only observed the outcomes, never studied the architecture. While they celebrated in boardrooms and press conferences, I was calibrating a ghost, a perfect replica engineered to die on schedule. The Rayall system lived on an encrypted drive, locked in a Faraday cage in my Boulder apartment, triple secured and untouched. I kept it separate, pristine, authentic, because someday I'd need to prove what I'd built versus what they'd broken. Marcus and his board could rebrand everything, monetize the vision, publish white papers claiming credit. But when Phoenix 7 failed, they wouldn't even identify which component cracked first. That was the elegance of my decoy. It wasn't sabotage, it was silence weaponized. I didn't rebuild Phoenix 7 for revenge. I rebuilt it because someone finally asked the right question: what do you want to create next? In that moment, I realized nobody at Titan Tech had ever asked me anything that didn't come with an impossible deadline attached. It happened 2 weeks after my termination. A quiet message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Sarah Mitchell, former integration lead at a startup called Apex Dynamics. Back then, they were dismissed as irrelevant, too small scale, too idealistic for serious defense contracts. But Sarah had vision, and more importantly, she remembered mine. We met in a converted aircraft hangar outside Denver. No press, no executives in $1,000 suits, just engineers who still communicated in algorithms and ethics instead of profit margins. Apex wasn't interested in copying Titan Tech's approach. They wanted to go leaner, smarter, more precise. Where Titan Tech scaled through bureaucracy, Apex moved like a special operations unit. They didn't just give me a workspace, they gave me creative freedom. No NDAs stapled to every brainstorming session. No month-long approval cycles for innovation. Just access, trust, and the resources to build something meaningful. I didn't show them Phoenix 7's complete source code immediately. But I began rebuilding it from memory, modular, adaptive, capable of learning mid-mission and recovering from incomplete data streams without human intervention. We called it Phoenix Reborn. New architecture, new philosophy, a system designed not just to respond to warfare, but to think beyond it. Meanwhile, Titan Tech continued pushing forward with their showcase demonstration, completely unaware that their stolen copy had begun its slow deterioration. Every time they patched an error, every time they overrode a synchronization failure, they accelerated the unraveling process. Apex stayed off their radar, small, quiet, intentional. While Marcus delivered speeches at Pentagon briefings, I was debugging code at 3 a.m. with a team who believed engineering was still an act of imagination, not just profit extraction. They didn't know I used to lead the most expensive military platform on the continent. And I didn't tell them, because this wasn't about proving who I used to be. It was about demonstrating what I could still build when the right people were watching. It didn't fail with explosions. It failed with whispers. One drone stopped responding to commands, then 5, then 37, all drifting like digital ghosts through a battlefield simulation that would determine the future of American defense technology. By the time the Pentagon called for an emergency system audit, the collapse had already begun, and Marcus Hartwell still believed it was a minor server glitch. It started on day 76. A back-end diagnostic specialist at Titan Tech flagged an anomaly. Unit 061 had rejected its firmware update 4 consecutive times. Unusual, but field units could malfunction under stress. Then Unit 073 failed to recalibrate its terrain mapping. Unit 089 stopped executing evasive protocols mid-flight. These weren't accidents. They were tremors from a fault line nobody knew existed. Inside Apex, we monitored quietly. I'd installed a passive surveillance script weeks earlier, just a few lines of code watching from a distance, logging public telemetry anomalies from Titan Tech's testing zones. My laptop screen blinked red that Tuesday morning. By day 80, I had 63 error reports archived on an encrypted drive. I didn't interfere, didn't manipulate anything, because the brilliance of my system wasn't how it failed, it was how they couldn't fix it. Each time Titan Tech's administrative team attempted a reset, Phoenix 7's shell rejected their credentials. It wasn't a cyber attack. It wasn't malware. It was integrity protocol recognizing they didn't belong, that the heartbeat was missing, that the synchronization was counterfeit. Marcus kept scheduling press conferences, marketing the drones as cutting-edge precision instruments. He had no idea they were running on borrowed time with code that had begun rotting from within. Then came the $800 million NATO demonstration contract. Open bidding, live trials, head-to-head technical competition. Marcus couldn't decline. He thought the stage would humiliate us. He didn't know I'd written the original demonstration protocols. I stood at the back of the Pentagon conference room as Apex's system responded to simulated threats, rerouted command decisions through edge AI optimization, and executed coordinated flight patterns without a single human directive. Phoenix Reborn moved like liquid intelligence, fluid, invisible, lethal in its precision. Then came Titan Tech's turn. On paper, performance should have been identical. In reality, it disintegrated. Drones lagged behind response windows. Target recognition failed. Unit 184 refused new terrain overlays entirely. The room of military observers shifted uncomfortably. Whispers echoed from corners. Then the crash, a complete system timeout triggered by an override attempt. Every screen went black. Across the room, Marcus Hartwell's face drained of color. He stood frozen, one hand reaching toward a future he no longer controlled. I didn't smile. But inside, something finally exhaled. The first call came from a blocked number, then 6 more from Titan Tech emails I hadn't seen in months. But the one that mattered came from the Senate Armed Services Committee, requesting my testimony by name, not as a saboteur, but as the original architect of a compromised national defense platform. I arrived in a charcoal business suit. No legal team, no prepared statements, just a folder containing system logs, biometric authentication traces, and rejected override attempts signed with administrative keys they should never have possessed. Senator Williams, a former software engineer himself, sat at the center of the panel. Ms. Chun, he said evenly, is it accurate that you embedded a security protocol in Phoenix 7 that restricted access to your original biometric identity? Yes, I replied without hesitation. Was this malicious in intent? No, sir. It was a security integrity measure outlined in my original system documentation. They copied a version of the platform without understanding what it required to remain functional. He nodded slowly, like someone finally understanding the earthquake after studying the fault line. I submitted 3 documents, a time-stamped architecture log encrypted with my digital signature, a server access rejection record showing EM337B authentication failures across 94 drones, and an internal memo from Titan Tech's legal department mentioning damage containment before attribution. The room didn't gasp. This wasn't theater, it was accountability. Marcus Hartwell didn't appear at the hearing. He resigned 6 hours later with no statement, no denial, just disappearance like a system going offline. The Department of Defense terminated Titan Tech's contracts within a week. Apex was never mentioned publicly, but insiders understood. I received dozens of messages from former colleagues, some apologizing, others begging for second chances. I didn't reply. I also didn't block them. I just let them wait in the silence they'd once given me. As headlines spiraled and analysts speculated, I returned to my Boulder apartment and did something I hadn't done in months. I powered up the original drive, the one they'd never touched, and watched Phoenix 7 boot without a single error. Not as proof. Not as revenge. Just as confirmation that the system still recognized who built it, even if they never had. They thought they'd stolen the crown jewel of defense technology. But I never built Phoenix 7 to serve corporate empires. I built it to protect what couldn't protect itself. And that meant rewriting its future without their hands on the controls. I didn't sell the code. I didn't license it to the highest bidder. I walked into the offices of Global Relief Dynamics, a humanitarian organization deploying advanced technology in disaster zones, flood rescues, earthquake response, medical supply drops in war-torn regions. Overworked, underfunded, outmatched by the scale of human suffering they tried to address. I gave them everything. Not from pity, but because they asked the right question: can this technology save lives? And never once inquired what it would cost them in equity or ownership percentages. I left them the complete Phoenix codebase and walked out with nothing in return. No press coverage, no licensing agreements, no brass nameplate. Because real power isn't who signs the patent, it's who controls the outcome. And I wanted this one to fly toward something human, toward people who needed help, not away from them. 6 months later, Marcus Hartwell stood trial for intellectual property fraud, obstruction of justice, and unauthorized deployment of classified software. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. The truth had already unraveled quietly, line by line, in every system log and court exhibit they submitted. When the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, I was at my father's retirement dinner, watching him cut into a cake decorated with tiny airplanes. There was no press release, no victory celebration, just quiet confirmation that I'd reclaimed what was mine. Not with vengeance. Not with noise. But with design. I didn't pull the rug out from under them. I just let them forget to ask who wove it in the first place. They didn't just steal her invention, they tried to erase her existence, expecting she'd disappear quietly. But instead of retaliating with rage, she planted a silent timer inside the empire they'd built on her name and watched it collapse under the weight of its own arrogance. The story of Vera Chin and the Phoenix 7 platform isn't just about corporate betrayal. It's about what we do when our value is stripped away in rooms we helped build. It's about dignity in silence, precision in pain, and designing outcomes instead of simply reacting to injustice. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is letting the truth speak for itself.